Welcome to Sex Ed 201. I will be your instructor today. I'm Liz. Now, let's do a brief recap of Sex Ed 101. Don't have sex. Use contraception. Don't get pregnant, which you won't because you're not going to have sex. And, oh yeah, STIs are scary. Oh yeah, and there was one more thing. What was it? All right, porn. We're not talking about porn here. We have parental controls. The kids are not going to watch the porn on the internet as long as we have those parental controls. It's going to be fine. It's going to be okay. We don't have to talk about it. Trust me. On a serious note, though, we often see sex ed as an issue for how we educate young adults. But a lot of us also have questions now as adults. But because we're adults, we don't need a class, right? We know how to have sex. It's pretty straightforward, and we're all satisfied all the time, right? It seems like the last thing we'd like to admit is having uncertainty about sex, be it with a partner or even just enjoying ourselves. But like eating, sleeping, or even breathing, those things seem pretty straightforward on face value. But there's always ways to eat better, sleep better, breathe better, to relax better. Like that with sex too, it's not always super straightforward. So what I'm basically saying is adults need a form of sex education for themselves, which, by the way, is important for the kids too, because if we're comfortable at least talking about sex, we don't have to pass on our grand old, especially American, grand old tradition of stigmatizing and misunderstanding sex to our next generation. Now, back to us adults though, because this one's about us. While there's always room for improvement for men, the problem is especially acute for women. In reality, while a lot of these definitions are overly broad, for women, for example, 43% of women at some point in their lives exhibit symptoms that fall under the umbrella of FSD, otherwise known as female sexual dysfunction. Some estimates have even shown that 1 in 10 women have never had an orgasm in their lives. In the case of the first statistic, that one was designed by pharmaceutical companies that were trying to create a female Viagra to solve all sorts of sexual dysfunction in women. However, that definition was so broad that it included everything from chemical changes in your body to circumstantial changes like ups and downs in relationships, or being with a partner who's not as attentive to your needs, or just changes in your own life like mood fluctuations, stress, depression, menstrual cycle, the list goes on. So this really all just means that there are a lot of women who have been dissatisfied with their sex life at some point in time, which also matters for men too, since for a lot of these men, they are partners to a lot of these women. And that's just talking about people who are couples and in heterosexual relationships. Basically, pretty much everyone I've talked to at some point in their lives has wanted to improve their sex life for some reason at some point. These issues don't just sit in a vacuum either. Our inability to ask questions, our lack of resources, the misunderstandings, all have real-world consequences on our health, our relationships, and our well-being. I saw this firsthand. In short, as Chris said so eloquently, I went from doing art around female sexuality to working at an investment bank to pay the bills, to selling sex toys, to making sex toys. And when I was starting to sell sex toys, I started getting a lot of questions from a lot of different people. There were the college students who asked about the G-spot a lot. There was the woman who was about to get married, and she had never had an orgasm with a partner. She never told her fiance about this, and she was wondering if there was something wrong with her and what she could do about it, especially since she had never talked about it with him, and she was worried that she was going to be hurting her marriage before it even got started. There are also the women who were in their 40s, 50s, 60s, who were going through menopause or about to go through menopause, and for some of them, they were experiencing changes to their bodies that were affecting their sex life. And in some of those cases, it almost, to them, felt like that they had to relearn their body and what they liked, because what worked for them in their 30s may not necessarily work for them in their 50s. So basically, whether you're 18, 55, 75, or even 105, everyone had questions about sex, and especially questions that pertain to their own bodies, their own circumstances, their partners, their own lives. But where do they go to ask these questions? Why do they go to me and not, say, an OBGYN? Some did, but many were rebuffed. Having an infection or having a baby falls within their purview. Some simply did not see sex and pleasure as part of their responsibility. There are also some great sex therapists out there, but it can be tough for someone to go and see a sex therapist, and they're oftentimes also pretty expensive. So then, what about that other thing that I'm sure some of us are thinking about? That big, grand, beautiful, free thing called the internet. You get a million answers, most of them contradictory, and some things that you weren't quite looking for originally. Besides that, though, even if you found some reliable accounts, what worked for one person may not necessarily work for you. So why not a Udacity for sex? Why not put together some sort of course or curriculum for something like this? But that's the exact problem with trying to do a specific course or a curriculum. How do you teach something where the facts are simply different for different people because of how their bodies worked? You can teach anatomy. You can teach terminology. You can even teach a few techniques. But a lot of sexual experiences are specific to individuals. Now, when I say that everyone is different, you might think, yeah, that's nice, like everyone said that. That's sort of, the running theme of this presentation, the running theme of life. But what I'd like to ask here is, how do we start describing how we're different when it comes to sex? Because if we can start talking about some of that, we can get a better sense of what works for one person versus what works for another person. Because we don't have a lot of ways to talk about this, given that sex is a pretty taboo topic, has been for a long time, it's been rather difficult to understand this notion. But what we found early on in our research and in our testing and what other research has supported is that there are some ways that we can start talking about it. And one example that I'm going to show you here is orgasm patterns, or different experiences of pleasure. So what you're seeing here behind me is an orgasm. It's pelvic floor contractions. This one we call an ocean wave. It's a rhythmic pattern of pelvic floor contractions. This one is a volcano. It's a sharper increase in pelvic floor contractions, also an orgasm. And then there is this one, which kind of looks like a mix of the two, but the people who exhibit this orgasm describes it as the part where the pelvic floor is relaxing or going downward, almost like this sort of relaxing motion. So why am I showing you these charts? Well, these are 3 different charts from 3 different people. And not only are these charts just different because whatever, they're just lines, right? But also the subjective experience of how they describe an orgasm is distinctly different from one another. Is it rolling waves? Is it a sort of detensioning or relaxing sort of feeling? Or is it a sudden burst? What we see here now is not only are the subjective experiences different, but also the physical experiences are different. And at least from what we've seen and from what research that's out there, these differences are consistent within a person over time. Someone who has an ocean wave pattern will always have an ocean wave pattern. They may have different feelings of orgasm, and you can see that there's physical expressions of differences, there's differences in the charts, but they always seem to fall into the same pattern. So when we talk about this fluffy notion that everyone is different, it's not just a nice thing to say. It is literally the case, physiologically and experientially, that drives this difference in experience. This is why you can't do a one-size-fits-all for pleasure education. So the next time you're reading a book or watching a movie and you see a scene, like a sex scene, and you're thinking, that sounds different than what I've experienced. Why can't I have that? It may very well be that that person is literally having a different experience than you. And that's fine, because they're having their great experience. They can't have your great experience. And your experiences are both pretty awesome. So if we're all different, how do we learn and what do we do? There's only one real solution to this, which is self-experimentation and trying things out. Couples who explored different ways to increase pleasure were 12 times more likely to be sexually satisfied. Likewise, research has also consistently shown that women who were more comfortable with themselves were much more likely to be sexually satisfied. So basically, try new things, get more comfortable and confident, and your sex life improves. It's been the most reliable way and one that's worked based on you and your own unique body and experiences. So, like those cheesy stories of journeys and self-discovery, you ultimately have to teach yourself. It's a bit disappointing because we'd all like to have that magic bullet, or in some cases, the magic pill, which is why people were so excited when female Viagra came out, even though it had some pretty terrible side effects, and even then, it wasn't really the magic pill that we were all hoping for given those trade-offs. Unfortunately, in 201, the grand reveal is that there isn't one. Given what I do, obviously I think sex toys can help, and we can create products that are geared specifically towards this. But ultimately, it's a matter of mindset. We all get into habits and ruts. And although we start from different levels, different experiences, what's the same for all of us is that we all need to be continuously learning and exploring. And things can get even better. I don't think anyone has ever said, no matter how much they know, that I never want my sex life to be better than this. So go. Try a new position, explore new fetishes, new sex toys. Go and explore. But most of all, realize that it's okay to not know everything. We all got the short end of the stick when it comes to the stigmas in society around this. But what we can do is be open to new experiences and be okay with the fact that there is no magic bullet or pill. And know that what we do have to do is to be open to these new experiences, and remember that this really is about the journey for all of us, and that there is no destination. Thank you.